All right, Ryan, what's on your radar?
Well, let's take a closer look at Gavin Newsom today. So the California governor clearly very much wants to be president. And it's easy to tell that he sees a potential opening in 2024 with Biden flailing and the party having built practically no bench at all. And while the drama between him and DeSantis is good culture war fodder, there's actually a much more pressing question that will answer whether or not he ought to be disqualified for the nomination as a Democrat right out of the gate. And that's a possible ballot measure that would raise the state's minimum wage to $18 an hour. Now, Tulchin Research, which did the polling for Bernie Sanders' 2016 and 2020 campaigns, surveyed 1,000 likely California voters last week and found overwhelming support for the potential measure. But here's the problem. It's not on the ballot yet. But Newsom could change that. If Newsom or the legislature don't move, the measure won't be on the ballot until 2024. But if he moves, he can get it on this coming November. That would start the process of getting people raises earlier, but it would also have a political upside for Democrats. And if Newsom doesn't do it, you have to ask why. Now, Tulchin's research is clear. So Californians support it by a 68-21 margin. It's an incredible plus 48 gap. A majority of 53% say they would definitely vote yes, which is practically unheard of for a ballot measure. Now, when people who lean one way or another are counted in, support goes up to 73% to 22%. It even has 53% support, including leaners, among Republicans. But take a look at two of the even more important numbers there. So look right there, the 68% next to no party preference and the 64% at the bottom next to voters who live in 2022 battleground congressional districts. Now, no party preference is California's version of independence, and they support this by more than 2-1. The same is true for voters who live in congressional swing districts. And with the House on the line, if Newsom's state wins a bunch of close House races, that's the kind of thing he can point to running for the presidential nomination. Now, the other question is whether this would actually get more people out to vote and whether those people would then be more likely to vote for Democrats. And the survey shows that in both cases, the answer is yes. So 75% of voters want Newsom to put this on the ballot, including 71% of voters in swing districts. Now, 2/3 of voters described it as, quote, urgent that he do so. And this part is key. 60% of voters in swing districts said they would think more favorably of Newsom if he put it on the ballot. And finally, would voters be more likely to cast a ballot at all? A full 85% say they'd be more likely to vote, with more than half saying they'd be, quote, much more likely to vote. Now, that includes 66% of black voters who said they'd be much more likely to vote. 52% of people under 40 said the same thing. Liberal voters said much the same. So roughly 9 out of 10 young people, 9 out of 10 black voters, and 9 out of 10 liberal voters all said they'd be more likely to vote if it's on the ballot. Now, if you're all three and you're young, black, and what the survey calls liberal, you're probably closer to 10 out of 10 more likely to vote. This will be a revealing moment for Newsom. There's just no sensible reason not to put this on the ballot. It wouldn't even be that hard. So if he doesn't do it, there's no reason to think that as president, he'd even try to do any of the hard stuff. And so if Newsom doesn't put this on the ballot, he would have to call an executive session, and Democrats have a supermajority, but he could do it in like a day. If he doesn't put this on the ballot, then the backers of the petition, can gather signatures, and it'll go on the 2024 ballot. So it's not as if it will never get on, but it won't be on in November if he doesn't do it. And if he doesn't do it, you'd have to ask, well, what are you doing?
Well, yeah, and that's why I don't get Gavin Newsom, period. I don't think he's a talented politician. I think the only reason he gets mentioned at all is because he has a good relationship with the media, but he's been a pretty abject failure in California on many different measures. One of my favorite pieces of investigative reporting during the pandemic is something Lee Fong did for you guys at The Intercept, where he documented how successfully Hollywood lobbied Gavin Newsom to get carve-outs to COVID regulations that shut down so many other different businesses. And so the fact that Gavin Newsom is resisting this this. In that environment for Democrats, in this moment for Democrats, when just about everybody, I mean, even corporatists like Kamala Harris were running pretty far to the left in 2020 when they were primarying, right? Like they were actually, they understood where the base was, and maybe you wouldn't trust that they'd actually govern that way, but they were certainly paying lip service, and that's sort of what helped Biden win. He was the one person who was kind of resisting that tug to even pay lip service to people on some of these ideas. So Newsom, I just plainly don't understand. He's just a bad politician. I don't get it, and I think this is another example of how he's not even good at being a corporate Democrat. He's not even good at it.
Yeah, right. And what Newsom has going for him is that our kind of East Coast chauvinism means that a ton of Democrats and a decent amount of the media will be coming into a Newsom presidential campaign looking at him as kind of a blank slate. Totally. They know California exists, but they really don't follow the ins and outs of the politics there. And so if he did something like this while people are starting to pay attention, people will be like, oh, that's pretty clever. And Democratic voters love cleverness. Like they love to think that they're being that they're outsmarting the opponents. When Karl Rove put all of those gay marriage bans on the ballot in 2004, Democrats thought it was abhorrent, but they were kind of impressed on a
game
kind
respect
of
game
tactical level, a game respect game. And so if Democratic kind of primary voters saw Newsom doing something like this, they would say to themselves, okay, this is somebody that wants to win. Mm-hmm. And they're so, I think, fed up with losers, with people who don't seem willing to do even the most basic things to try to outmaneuver Republicans, that just this little tiny bit of effort would go an extraordinary amount of way. And, not for nothing, millions of people would see a raise as a result of this, because it's not just people. If you raise the minimum wage, people who were already making above the minimum wage, they often get a little bump as well, because you're like, hey, I'm leaving. It's not fair if this person who hasn't been here as long as me is getting a raise, I get a raise too. And so then people across the board end up getting raises. So this would benefit enormous numbers of people. But I think it would also be a huge benefit to Newsom. And it like I said, if he doesn't do it, it's extremely telling. It means that the guy just doesn't have any fight in him and fits the character that you're talking about, just a lousy politician. We'll see. I don't know. It just seems like such a no-brainer, but I'm never surprised when I'm disappointed. That's for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, never underestimate politicians' ability to be bought. And yeah, here's something really interesting: is you sound a lot like one of the founding members of the Freedom Caucus, or someone, not ideologically, of course, but tactically, or someone who was just an early Trump adapter, like a Jeff Sessions. It was this idea that Republicans are losers. They do not fight Democrats. They have no aggression, sort of tactically, politically. They're wimps who go along with what the establishment narrative is and the establishment sort of line, and they never deviate from it. And that's how Republicans really ended up with Donald Trump, who trampled the rest of the candidates in the primary. He really won the general election by winning, obviously, he was a long shot in the primary, and just coming out as brash as he was, that appealed to some Democrats too. It appealed to some Obama voters. It appealed to some Bernie voters. And I think there is this just deep sense and deep frustration, as you've talked about when you talk about filibuster reform, Ryan, with inaction and the kind of malaise in Washington, D.C. And so people who do show fight and show a willingness to actually take steps, to take action when it's not always easy, that's a total political winner right now, just across the aisle. It doesn't matter if you're on the left or the right, but Democrats seem to have struggled. They haven't had their Celebrity Apprentice wake-up call yet.
Right, and it shouldn't be such a massive step to put a ballot measure that's supported by 6 or 7 out of 10 of the public onto the ballot. That should be, you look at that poll and you're like, oh, well, let's just do this. This is simple. But in the world that we're in, it would actually count as something courageous. And that is perhaps the most pitiful statement of all about the party.
Anyway,
I'm looking forward to seeing what's on your radar up next.